Good afternoon. I'm Janet Irwin, Head of Education at the Ulrich Museum of Art at WSU. We are so pleased that all of you have joined us this afternoon for this vital discussion on race and parenting with our panel of community leaders and mothers, Marquetta Atkins, Claudia Amaro, Britten Kuckleman, and Michelle Vann. Before I introduce our guests, I would like to thank the Kansas Creative Arts Industries Commission for their generous support of our 2021 Ulrich virtual series. Invite everyone to visit our website to view the full lineup of virtual programs and exhibitions, including Gordon Parks' I Too Am America, an exploration of the realities of poverty and racism through his powerful photographs of children and families. Following the panel discussion, we will invite each of you to join the Q&A conversation. You will receive a notification to turn your cameras and mics on. If you would prefer to add your comments or questions to the chat or Q&A box, please feel free to do so at any time during the program. We are especially grateful to Marquetta Atkins, who was instrumental in bringing together the extraordinary women on our panel today. Thank you, Marquetta. Marquetta is a community educator who brings her passion for working with youth and her creative energy to the table as a facilitator. For years, she has dedicated herself to ensuring that young people are equipped with the tools for a better future. She was born and raised in Wichita, Kansas, and graduated with a degree in communications from Wichita State University. Her persistence in reaching her educational goals equipped her to be a mentor for high school youth in Wichita, including her own children, Devin, who attended WSU, and Amani, a junior at Prairie View A&M University in Texas. Marquetta's passion for youth development is rooted in her conviction that youth are the change makers we need for the transformation of our communities, both today and in the future. In 2015, she founded Camp Destination Innovation to expose young people to a variety of career options, encouraging them to create their own future. Striving to eliminate the barriers facing young people and women as entrepreneurs, Marquetta created Women Entrepreneurs of Kansas, or We Can, an initiative to support the growth and power of women entrepreneurs. Marquetta is also the Director of Programming and Youth Development at the nonprofit, The Seed House, where she developed the youth group Progeny for youth either touched by or passionate about the juvenile justice system. Marquetta is committed to community and sits on various boards and committees throughout the city of Wichita. She has been awarded Best in Innovation by the Wichita Business Journal, the Ron Walters Leadership Award by the Wichita branch of the NAACP, and a Civic Engagement Award from Wichita Urban Professionals. Claudia Amaro is the owner of A, B, and C Bilingual Resources, LLC, and a founder of Planeta Venus, an online Spanish language radio station. Her immigration story is featured in more than 5 books in English and Spanish and several local and national articles. That spotlight has helped her to bring light to different issues in the immigrant community. She has been married for almost 23 years and is the mother of a 21-year-old son. Britten Kuckleman is a Wichita native of mom of 2. After moving back to Wichita after graduating from college, she worked for the Wichita Public Library in various roles and began getting more involved in civic life through volunteering and community advocacy. Currently, she is the Director of Library and Information Services for WSU Tech. She also serves on the Kansas Leadership Center Civic Engagement Advisory Board, helping to expand civic engagement efforts across the state of Kansas. Britten has a passion for civic engagement and lifelong learning opportunities. Michelle Vann is the founder and CEO of Vanntastic Solutions, where she serves as a confidence coach. She helps women achieve a healthy balance in their lives by dissolving the mindset issues that keep them stuck. Michelle is also the founder of Sisters Can We Talk, a nonprofit that uses a Healthy Me initiative to provide resources for women to overcome the social determinants of health. She is the author of 2 books, Stop the Merry-Go-Round, I Want to Get Off, and Help Along the Journey, and a co-author of the anthologies Daily Dose of Declarations and Becoming a Shero. Michelle is a mother, a pastor's wife, a coach, an educator, and a public speaker. Michelle will be joining us a little bit later in the program today. Welcome, ladies. I will turn it over to you, Marquetta.
From all different kind of backgrounds and have an honest conversation about race, motherhood, and how it impacts us and our children. So I'm going to go ahead and start it off by letting Claudia and Britten introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their motherhood journey and some of the issues that stand out the most to them when it comes to what we're facing today. 2020 was a hell of a year. And so, yeah, just give us a little insight on where you stand right now in motherhood with race, everything.
Thank you, Marquetta. I'm honored to be here among all of you. All of you are very close friends of mine, and I see some people that I know on the audience. So I want to thank you for being here and for this opportunity. This is a very special panel for me or event for me because usually, and we shared this before in other conversation, I'm so used to talk about my story, and I'm always very careful of not talking a lot about my family just because I think, my son is already becoming an adult and I believe on the right and I want to respect what they want to share to the world. So in this panel, I'm gonna be a little bit more open about some personal things, which is kind of weird for me. Like I said, I'm so used to talk about my story, but I usually talk about things that I know are gonna like push the systemic, like some kind of systemic change. In this case, again, is more personal. So I want to talk to you a little bit about me as a mother. For some of you who already know my story, my immigration story, I'm an immigrant who came into this country when I was 12 years old. And everything I've done lately around immigration and around helping the Latino community is actually based in two people the most. Like a lot of people are part of that journey, but I want to talk today more about first my mother. So I'm going to kind of like turn it upside down. My mother is the first person that I always think about every time I make a decision around the immigrant community or I speak about issues in the immigrant community. It's always my mother. She's the one who inspires me to do all the work that I do. And then my son, of course. A lot of the craziness that I've done in the last few years is because of my son, because of me and my husband trying to open a path for him, open doors for him as a son of immigrants. So where do I stand? Again, my son just turned 21 last month, and it's been a lot of changes in the last couple of years. He's been through a lot, and I'm happy to expand a little bit more on that later. But I want Britten to talk to us about her experience.
So I will be honest with you all. I am the youngest here. My children are the youngest. And the women who are on this panel are the women that I look to for mothering advice. So I'm going to be learning as much as everyone else who is here with this, because these are the women that I look to as models for the type of mother that I want to be. Marquetta, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm truly honored because I feel like I'm still trying to figure this out on my own. My children are 7 and then 3, almost 4 next month. So they're still fairly young, but they're definitely getting into that age of they are, my oldest is learning about things in school and starting to ask questions and just becoming more aware of the world and the community around him. So they're really getting into that time where now like we're having those questions come out and I'm trying to push those conversations. So I'm actually really pumped about this conversation that's coming up. But I think we were all talking before just to prep for this, and that was I was already taking notes and learning new things. So I'm very excited for this conversation. I want to encourage everyone in the audience to, if you have questions, throw them in the chat for sure, because that is something that we can help just like move this conversation to what is going to help you learn and move forward on your own, because I know we're all going to be doing that today. But I won't spend any more time on my intro. So wherever we want to go next, Marquetta.
Okay, so this is going to be a really casual conversation, you guys. Just like Britten said, in the audience, when you have questions, chime in. We wanted this to be a discussion that is grounded in healing. I think that's the biggest thing, because we have the icky conversations all the time. We want to be able to have a clean conversation that is grounded in healing. How do we move forward? What kind of things we need to give our kids to make sure that they are not carrying the sins of our ancestors, or the sins of, I mean, we are really literally carrying the burdens of decisions that were made generations and generations and generations before us. And it's being passed down. When are we going to cut that off? When are we going to be like, okay, they've had their moment. It's time for us to take control of ours and the future when it comes to our babies, so they can live in a healthier environment that has less hostility in it. So this is what this conversation is going to be grounded in. We hope to keep it authentic and real. And as my friends say, we lean into discomfort, not disrespect. So for me as a mother, I have 2 kids, like stated earlier. My son is now 25 years old and my daughter is 20 years old. And we all know the issues in America when it comes to motherhood and raising Black children in this country and what they're up against. It's terrifying. And I always like to balance the terrifying part with it, with the rewards that comes with being a mother of color. I love my culture. I love my kids growing up in their culture and embracing it. But it does not come without a lot of issues, you know? So from the very first time that you take your kid and you put them out into this world, you have to deal with racism, bigotry. We talk about having these race conversations and how gently that we have to bring like white people into the conversation. But the first time that I myself was called the N-word, I was probably 6 years old, 7 years old on the playground. So we're not gently carried into these topics as minorities. We're kind of thrust into it head first and have to learn how to navigate those spaces at a young age. So it's so important to me that as we have these conversations, that we recognize the fact that talking about race, talking about how we're going to get ahead of it, is not an easy conversation. Any kind of healing that you want to do is not going to be easy. Just know that we can heal from it though. So let's rip off our band-aids and get this going. So the first question I want to ask you about is identity. When you guys, I mean, growing up and the way, the different cities, the different experiences that you've had, how did your identity impact the way that you deal with race or how you receive issues of race?
Thank you for that question, Marquetta. In my case, I'm gonna be very honest with you and tell you that I feel comfortable with my identity, I wanna say from like 5 years from now. Like before then, I've been like, you know, waving or maybe not having that identity or feeling completely comfortable with who I am. Because in my case, I consider myself bicultural, although I was born in Mexico and I'm so proud of my culture and I love being Mexican. I also grew up with a lot of things from Americans, right? So it was very difficult for me growing up, living in those 2 cultures. And now I'm very conscious about that. That's probably happening again with my son. And I can give you a couple examples, like, you know, myself being a little bit more open, more, I don't know how to say it, just wanted to go to college and stuff like that. And my mom coming, and I don't want to say from all, like everybody in Mexico thinks this way, but I think rural areas in Mexico, they still believe and they still raise girls just to grow up, get married and have children. And when I wanted it to do more than that, it was even my family saying like, oh, your husband is going to divorce you. You know, why do you want to go to college now? You're already married. You have your kids. You have to like, so that was very, and that's one of the things that maybe didn't make me feel comfortable with my identity. I was like, I'm crazy, right? I believe I was crazy. I believe my husband, like probably like 10 years after I was married, I asked my husband once, when are you going to divorce me? And he was like, what are you talking about? You know, but that's usually like the case in a lot of people from the culture where I come from. And so defining my identity was really, really tough. And it wasn't until, I want to say like 5 years ago, where I was like, this is who I am. I'm comfortable with who I am. I don't have to follow anybody's like American or Mexican. I just can be myself. But it took me like a lot of years, and I've been trying to open those doors for my son. And I guess I shared this with you last time that we talked, where like my son on his senior year, he was very troubled. He was like himself, like he was like thinking, he was very anxious and stuff. And one day we had a conversation, and I asked him what's going on, and he's like, well, my coach is telling me that I need to leave after high school. I need to go somewhere far away from you guys, because that's the healthy way, that's the way you should be, and blah, blah, blah. And then I talked to him about the culture, right? And I'm like, well, I think that's kind of the culture of Americans, and it's okay. I mean, that's independence. That's for you to learn, more about your, like on your own and stuff. I said, but you also have the Mexican culture. And then the Mexican culture, even if you're a guy or a girl, usually you don't leave your house until you get married or until you have a career finished, 25, 30 years old. So I'm like, you can take in consideration both of those cultures and follow your heart, and whatever you're ready for. And even though like I'm coming from that culture where it'll be easier for me as a mom to say, oh no, I want you here until you finish school. I wanted it to be open-minded and understand and be a companion for him more than just trying to impose my own culture or my beliefs on what the culture shall be. So that was one of the things. But so like taking my story and then also be more like knowing how I can try and support my son so he can get sooner to that identity, finding, to that feeling comfortable with his identity. I think that's one of my biggest challenges and jobs that I have right now.
Oh, I would say same. Like you said that you just started becoming comfortable with your own 5 years ago. I feel like I'm still working on that, but my goal is to bring my children along with me, because I think Marquetta was talking about this before. How can we essentially get our children with and like not really like leave the generational trauma behind, because I don't think that we can do that instantly, but jump off the track and start moving forward on a new path, and not just like carry and keep on the same. And so I feel like that's like the approach that I'm taking, is how can I jump off of that track instead of just heading down the same direction, but bring my children with me as I'm moving forward. So I think I'm not quite, I think, to where you're at, Claudia, but I'm getting there. Yeah, that's like what I was thinking.
Claudia brought up a really good point too, that have really got me thinking about how many dualities our kids have to carry in this world. So they have to worry about, their culture, and the things that your culture teaches you, the values that your parents give you, the values that society sets for you, and the biases that society has about your culture and where you come from. And our kids have to be faced with all of this every single day. And from all of that pressure, figure out who in the hell they are. Who are they? And learn how to navigate and not upset their parents, not disrespect their culture, not disrespect or in most instances try to buck against society and what society feel like they should be. That's a lot of trauma to carry. And when I think about my identity, I grew up in Wichita, born and raised in Wichita, but I grew up on the west side of town. And so we're talking about the late 80s, early 90s, was my growing up on the west side of town. So I went to almost predominantly white schools growing up. I was used to diversity, being me and my friends separated in each class to make sure that there was a kid of color in each class. I was never the type of kid that assimilated necessarily. I think that my parents had raised me to have pride in who I was, but there's still that duality of being the only one in the room and having to deal with the little microaggressions that come with being the only Black person in the classroom. So I remember, and I think I talked to you guys about this before, when I was younger, like in the 2nd grade, and there was an odd smell in the class. And the teacher walked past every child in that class to pick me up by my shoulders and sniff me. It was the automatic assumption that I was the smelly thing in the classroom. And if anybody knows my mother, I have a mother that kept me well-groomed, well-dressed, well-cleaned to the nth of me. But out of all those kids, she chose me. Now imagine being probably 6.5, 7 years old and being picked up in front of your whole entire classroom and being sniffed. The humiliation that comes with that, the not understanding why she chose you out of those class, and then a realization that she chose you because you were Black. And being that little and having to carry that kind of trauma with you. It's real. And so when I think about identity, I never ever give credit to the painful things that happen to me. What I do give credit to is the outcomes, how I chose to carry it, what I chose to do with it at that age. At that age, I chose to tell my mom, and my mom handled that situation. Let's just say that teacher retired the next year. But so I told my mama, that's the best that I can do at 8 years old. I mean, 6, 7 years old, but carrying that kind of trauma and just connecting it to today and what our kids are looking at right now, what they got to see all last year, and making sure that we're having the conversations with our kids to kind of muddle through what kind of stresses they may be carrying right now, what kind of questions they have when it comes to race, and then what kind of things they're being exposed to online when it comes to race, and how to have these uncomfortable conversations with our kids, but necessary conversations. I see we have a question in the chat, and I want to make sure that I acknowledge it. It says, from Gretchen, it says, Marquetta, your story is heartbreaking. My family is a mixture of ethnic, racial backgrounds, from my daughter to my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, nieces and nephews. I struggle how much to talk frankly about racism and the dangers they may face, and protecting them from awareness of the evil that lurks in this country. Generally, I tell them about police murders and what to do if stopped by police, and about accomplishments of people of various colors. And we have friends from all groups, including religions. One of them has a choice, as she's is light-haired and green-eyed. Others won't have a choice except how to respond and how to be proud of who they are and welcome people of all backgrounds into their lives. And that's true. That's true. And you're doing the right thing. I mean, you're balancing the danger along with the brilliance. Because what happens is when people think about race, they tend to talk in a way that makes anybody outside of the person that you are seem like it's bad. Like if a little kid pointed and say, I see that Black girl, or I see that Chinese girl, or I see that Mexican girl, and the parent hurries and hits their hand and goes, don't call them that. Don't do that. I am a Black girl, that is a Mexican girl, that is an Asian girl. And my thing is, instead of making it seem like it's a bad thing, talk to your kids with understanding. Why don't you introduce them to that person? Hey, my child is interested in you. Can you tell them your name? That way they have an identifier and a connection. But making it seem bad to talk about race is immediately putting a barrier up in front of your child that says this is a taboo conversation, and they're going to be less likely to have these conversations because they've been trained at an early age that this is not the right thing to do. What do you guys think?
I was thinking when I was reading Gretchen's comment that also the trauma is real and it's there, and somebody and those conversations are not always like too many of those conversations are not always enough. You know, that we have to keep talking to them. Again, going back to my son, especially during his high school years, I talked to him a lot about the differences on like when he went to a friend's party and everybody was doing things. And I'm like, remember, if you're the only one different in that room, you're going to be the one who probably is going to face the most consequences. And that's not just me being paranoid. I mean, as you know, I work a lot in the community and I heard a lot from our community. And they're always like, this is the first time my son did this. And the other kids have done it before, but I don't know if they already know the system or because they're lighter skin, they let him go. And my son has to serve this and that. So, you know, from all those conversations that I've heard in the community, it's really hard and the trauma is real. Another incident that we had, my son had to drive to Southwest Kansas and he was driving a car back and it was during the pandemic. And as you know, I'm always translating stuff to share information with the community. So I'm trying to be very well informed on like, you know, what the governor is saying and stuff. So I talked to my son about some things like, you know, that day that he was gonna go there, he was concerned about the tag. And I talked to him about an executive order that, you know, they could drive for a certain time if they had everything else. So he took his insurance with him, his driver license, everything was in place. And he was stopped by a couple of police officers during his journey. The first one was very mean to him. And after he left, he called me and he was shaking. And I said, didn't you talk to him? Didn't you tell him what I told you? Yeah, I told him, but I was afraid that he was just going to arrest me, you know, and he was speaking to me very like angry and stuff. The second police officer was very nice. It was the opposite. And he even kind of discredited the first officer because the first officer told him that he could not drive that car anymore. And he was in the middle of nowhere. And he's like, what do I do, ma'am? I'm like, keep driving and call me. And actually, we were in the phone for like an hour where I told him to just set his phone, but I wanted to hear everything in case he came back and stopped him. And my husband and I were almost about to leave the house and just go head that way. He was like a couple hours away from here. And so it's like, and the trauma is there. Like I said, my son has been living, when he was 5 years old, my husband was arrested by police officers, turned into immigration. Then I went and tried to help him. And then I was arrested as well. And then my son was left by himself in the kindergarten. And you know, he was very used for me to always pick him up. Well, at the time, one of my sisters had to pick him up and he just didn't know what was happening. You know, he was only 5 years old. And then his father was detained for immigration for several months. And then that's where I had to make the decision of right after my husband was deported during that time, I had to make a decision of leaving this country, which was my home, leaving my mother, my sisters, my friends, my everything. But again, it was my son. It was thinking about my son. I had a pretty stable marriage with my husband, and I just didn't want my son to grow up without his dad. So I decided and left the country, but that has been very traumatic, particularly for my son. And like I said, I usually don't talk a lot about that. Then when we go back to Mexico, it's he's only 5, almost 6 years old. And then he faces bullying for being American there. And that's where I was very concerned, and I still concerned about his identity with all those changes, with all those, well, that trauma, like, you know, first here and then in Mexico. And then when he's 13, we came back and then he sees his mother being arrested by Border Patrol, you know, like being handcuffed, and he's only 13. And it's like, I remember when officers from the National Guard and the military started calling him when he was graduating from high school to join the military. I remember that he looked at me and he was like, why do I want to fight for a country that didn't want my parents here? You know, but I cannot forget his how he was looking at me that day, because it was like a sight with pain and then kind of like angriness, and I just like, I could feel his pain. So it's, like I said, the trauma is real, the trauma is there, and they keep facing whatever, like in your situation, Marquetta, whatever you face that day, you carry it your whole life, right? And then you have your kids, and then you're afraid that they're gonna go through that same thing.
Trust me, I was the mama that was always up at the school, and the school knew. They knew, and not to say that teachers didn't try it, but they found out really quickly that my kids were the wrong kids to try it with. But I mean, I'm here with you, Claudia, because, you know, as a parent of color, we, as a Black parent specifically, my son got the speech when he became a teenager. He got the speech about driving. He was not allowed to have more than 2 people in his car with him. Or else, if you have more, even if you were those 3, it was a means to get pulled over. My son, being 25 years old right now, still calls me whenever he gets pulled over. He puts it on speakerphone. This is the way that I feel like I'm protecting my child, and my child feels protected because he knows that I'm listening and I'm there. My kid was walking from home one day, and we live right down the street from his school, South High. And he would come home I work from home. He would come home, I would fix him lunch, and he would go on about his business and go back to school. He got pulled over by a cop walking back to the school. Mind you, all of the kids are walking back to school. And the officer asked him, "What are you doing? Where are you going? What gang are you a part of? What gang are you a part of?" And was profiling my child, who had just stepped out the door to walk back to school, which is a 5-minute walk from my house. That's how quick it took my child to get profiled. As a parent, that just angered the hell out of me. And I don't think people realize what that does, how a child carries that experience with them. It's dangerous. There's more questions in here, so I just want to make sure that I'm acknowledging the questions as they come in. This is from Senator Alita Fascadell. Hey, Senator. It says, Marquetta, with the majority of Black people in Wichita growing up on the northeast side of town, and those on the west side of town, and the west side of town is majority white, how did you think it affected you? Did you have more white friends or Black friends? This is the funny thing about me. Number one, I think I was born an activist, or into social justice. My 2 sheroes were Wonder Woman and Angela Davis since I was a little bitty girl. I was a white kid, so I always questioned everything. And I craved to be around people that look like me. And so I sought it out. And when I was in middle school and going to Wilbur and the kids were bused, it was like the first day of school was like the best thing that ever happened to me, you know, because I was finally around kids that looked like me. So I have friends from different races and backgrounds, and that's how I've been my whole entire life. So I have friends that are white, Black, Asian, from everywhere. And that's just the way that I like to be in my life, because I'm curious about people in general. I'm curious about different cultures. I'm curious about different religions. I'm curious about, race. I'm curious about learning about other people. I think the biggest barriers that we have when it comes to race is that none of us spend the time to get to learn about cultures outside of our own. And once you realize people are just people, literally, people are just people, it starts to eliminate a lot of the bigotry. It starts to eliminate a lot of the stereotypes that you have about other races. I lived in California when I was from the time I was 4 to like 6 years old. I was living in California, and my neighborhood was predominantly Mexican. I could not go into my friend's house without knowing how to speak a little bit of Spanish, or at least understanding a little bit of Spanish. That's what I did. I adapted to my environment. And so my thing is, the more we expose our young people to people outside of the ones that we know, the more that we break down those barriers. And it's more than just saying hi to your Black friend when you see them out. Think about how often have you had a different person of color inside your house for dinner? How often have you went out with friends of other races? How often have you participated in holidays that are not holidays that are your own? We celebrate Chinese New Year. We go into the culture and get immersed in the culture to celebrate their culture. We do this in our house, you know? So my thing is, I don't have more Black friends or more white, well, you know, to this day, let me be honest, I probably have more Black friends. But my friends across the board are from different backgrounds, races, religious, everything.
Marquetta, there is a question in the chat that's kind of around this that I want us to jump to.
Yeah.
It says, how do I as a mother implement this precautionary plan like Marquetta is describing with my son without causing psychological trauma to him myself? Which I think is a really interesting question, because we talk about not trying to pass as much trauma on to our children, but also preparing them for the reality that they're living in. I think, what are you two thinking about that?
I think what Marquetta is sharing with us, the exposure is very important. I remember when my son started inviting, so I keep talking to my son about probably the impact that could happen if he does something wrong. He's not going to be treated as the same as his white friends, for example. But at the same time, opening more like his heart and his eyes, and giving him that opportunity, like Marquetta said, of being more exposed to other cultures and people, and being more curious about other cultures. When my son started inviting people to the house, I remember one day, I was kind of strict at the beginning. Like I wanted to know who was coming into my house. So I will always ask, who's that, or what's his name? And I remember one day, one of his friends came in, and my son went out, and I asked him, I said, what are you doing? Because he will keep going out, in and out. And he's like, well, there's a friend outside, but he doesn't know if he's comfortable of coming in, and I don't know if you're gonna let him in. And I'm like, why? And he's like, well, he's a Black friend of mine. And I'm like, I don't have a problem with that, but just so I guess when we talk to them, and I don't know if that will answer the question, but I guess when we talk to them, making sure that we're not just also classifying ourselves as just one culture and one community, but like, and lead by the example, right, with them. I'm like Marquetta, I love, and one of the things that I feel the most proud about is like to feel free to jump between cultures. I feel very comfortable going and having dinner with Marquetta, with Brandy, with white people, with my Mexican friends, and I think that's something that I enjoy so much, and I wish everybody could enjoy that diversity in your conversations, and feeling good, not like being yourself. And that's something that I really want to get into my son. Like, yeah, you're brown, you can face these things, but at the same time, you're part of this community, and some people are gonna love you, and like you're gonna love other people as well.
I think too, the answer to Donna's question is, history is scary sometimes, but it's also full of vibrant stories. And you got to give the sugar, and I always call it sugar with arsenic. You got to give the sugar, you got to give the arsenic. You have to be straight with your kids. I was always really, really straight with my kids when it came to race and what they were going to be facing in this country. But I also took the parts of history that I am super, super proud of and instilled that into my kids. When my son was young, like little, he started learning all the Black inventors when he was 2 years old. I wanted him to know the contributions, my kids across the board, son and daughter, but I wanted them to know the contributions that Black made to this country, because they get erased all the time. I had books that I read to my kids. I had books that taught them about how in slavery times how they had to survive. And sometimes when people make fun of images like, when the pickaninny image or the person tapping and dancing in those old movies, people we'll call it, toe tapping and shoe shining, or, doing stuff that, cooning is the basic description for it. But cooning back then was survival. It was survival. So taken on, even when we think about code switching, slaves had to code switch since the very beginning. So yes, sir, yes, master, all that kind of stuff. And then when they're talking to each other, they talk to each other regularly, but in order to survive, they had to switch the way that they talk. And you see that in vernacular now with people of color. When they're around white people, they talk a certain way. When they're around Black people, they talk a certain way. Or you can see it when you're around your friends, you talk a certain way. But when you're in a professional setting, you talk a different way. For me, I don't code switch. You get me, no matter who you are, you're gonna get Marquetta across the board. I just don't have the energy to try to switch who I am, but that came with time. I had to learn, or I had to get so comfortable in myself that I said that I'm not gonna do this anymore. I'm not gonna play these games that you have to play in order to make it in society. Why am I giving people that kind of power? So I think, Tadana, just making sure that he knows his history, that he's grounded in his history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but making sure that that good part, all those wins that happen throughout history are highlighted as well. That way they're getting that part that makes them choke, but they're also getting water with it or something sweet with it to be able to swallow it. And statistically, and this is statistically, it's proven that when kids know their history, their real history, that they do better in school. When they know their history, you think about it. When we go to school, we learn about the 4th of July. Mm-hmm. We learned about how we came over to this country and made this country our own. We learn about Thanksgiving, but we all learn it from a Eurocentric way and European way. So when we're thinking about that, you think about who is achieving more in school, who's getting more of those jobs, who feels the confidence to go out there and face this world, because everything is based in European education. The kids are set up to win, but in order to learn our history, we probably get 1-2 pages in a book, and we learn about Martin Luther King, maybe Harriet Tubman, and Rosa Parks. Claudia, what do you get in the history book?
Not in the Midwest. I think California, Chicago, and Arizona are the only states that teach Mexican American studies. There's the Menendez family in California. Very few people, even Latinos, know about that story in Kansas. And that's one of the things that I've been fighting the most for, and at least encouraging our families to talk to the children about our history, because a lot of the times families, also like Latino families, they don't want to travel their kids. They don't want them to go through hard times. So they tell them, that's okay if you don't want to speak Spanish at home. That's okay if you just go and do well in school. And one of the things that I did when I was working for a school in Derby was create a multicultural program as a family engagement educator. And when I talked to some of those Latino kids about how in Mexico there's a lot of art, and I told them, I said, I bet all of your dads and moms danced when they were in school, like Mexican folklore. And they're like, So they went home, and then when they came back the next week and we had a meeting, they were like, you were right, they all dance. So we created like a dance group, and the kids were amazing. And a lot of those, some of the feedback that I got from the teachers is like, that some of those kids who started practicing in the dancing group and stuff, they started improving in their classes and social skills and stuff like that. So our history, our stories are very important. And I think they asked me about the question that my son did. I think that conversation is still going on. I mean, we keep talking about it. Again, my son is in that search of his identity. I don't know if you all remember that episode of Tweety. I used to love Tweety cartoons, where like he takes this magic potion and then he becomes a monster, and then he becomes a little bird again. And I see my son that way sometimes, like when sometimes he's very mad, and sometimes he's like, no, I'm Mexican, I'm not American. And then sometimes he's like, no, I'm not that Mexican, I'm more American. So I can see him, and my job is just like to be his company during those times. And when he allows me to have some of the conversation and share about myself, then I'll do it. but it's an ongoing situation.
I attended a panel last summer, and one of the comments that one of the panelists made was, the biggest way I advocate is by raising my son and educating him what I didn't learn in school. And I think that that actually was one of the biggest takeaways that I had for that, because it was, I was just like struggling. I was like, I don't know what to do right now. How do I make sure that my kids are understanding what's going on? But really, like, that is such impactful work, and it's constant work. And I'm in the process of like re-educating myself of what I didn't get to learn in school. So I'm a librarian by trade. So I often find books on everything, like whatever's going on, I am like calling in books from the library. And then that is what I use as like the starting point for the conversation. If I don't know how to start that, but I know that we need to talk about it, the book provides the avenue and the window into someone else's experience. And then that doesn't end there. You can't just read it and call it a day. That starts the conversation that I take on after that. So I think that's like really impactful work. And especially school age children, what are they learning in school? Because they're getting basically the same thing that we got. How do you carry that on forward afterwards? Because I'm the mom. I know what I got. I know what they're getting. I know that there's another half of the story that they're not. They get that at home. And then we have that conversation so that they're having that context way earlier than I ever got it. But I think that is one way that is really impactful work as a parent that you might not think about, or like think that it's enough, but that's actually part of reframing the story, because they don't need to wait until they're my age to then have to go and try and read all of this. I can get that to them now. And I feel like,
no, go ahead, Britten, you got it.
Oh, I was just like, I don't feel like those were conversations that I had. And I'm finding out this information now in the other half of the story. And I get upset about how, like, why aren't the history books that we're getting shown in school showing this? But I don't have to just like let my child go to school and then not have that conversation at home. So that's one of the biggest things I think that I'm focusing on now. And like, I feel like we're in a really lucky time where we do have access to a whole bunch of different news stories. I'm a big advocate for the library. You can find that information and use that as your jumping off point. But then like Wichita has a ton of different resources as well. Like, bring them along with your own personal re-education and use that as the conversation starter.
Absolutely. That'd be good events for the library to host too. I'm sorry.
No.
I'm not miss something. I'm sorry, guys. But I was thinking to myself, as you guys were talking, it's so important that kids get to see themselves or reflections of themselves in their stories at school, in movies. We talk about the school to prison pipelines, and we start to look at history and how it's told. And it's usually told by the people who won the war. It's told by the people who won, and it's told in the voice that they wanted to be told in. And this is important why, when you look at some cultures, that they kept orators, they kept people that are their storytellers in their culture, so that our stories can still live on through, through our families, but not necessarily landed in the books. I remember my child was doing a paper on the plane crash that happened on 21st Street. And he had to sit with my father and get my father's recollection of what happened that year that plane crashed into that predominantly Black neighborhood over there, and how it impacted his community. He didn't even, my son at that time, before it became a research topic for him, didn't even know that happened over there, and so it's so important that your family structure maintains some of those stories so that they can pass it on from generation to generation. And most things that you learn about history start in the home. It starts in the home, and we cannot depend on our schools to do it for us. So what you were saying, Britten, going out there and getting educated, picking up books that you normally wouldn't read, being curious about other cultures and what they're going through and what their history is. Everything is not just us coming to this country being asked to change our name, because that happened to every single culture that came over here. They wanted them to change their names and change how they carry themselves to be more European centric. And having our stories, having our cultures, having our things that we do as a culture is so important. And as African Americans, we have to redefine our culture, because ours was stripped away from us the moment that we came on this land. And so we don't have those ties, those strong ties to Africa that we should be having, because we don't even know, some of us don't even know what tribe we came from, you know? And so we are redefining our culture right now as we speak, as African Americans, and what is important to us when it comes to our culture. And even now, we still get to see it taken away from us.
You
So
know,
go ahead, Claudia. I'm sorry.
as Britten was sharing with us, that it's making me think about our roles as mothers in Wichita. I keep always talking about the lack of diversity, because we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion in Wichita, but I honestly don't see it happen. But I can admit that I see it happening in my circle. Like, we know that we haven't met in a long time because of the pandemic, but I love being part of this group. You know, the weekend group, and you know, Marquetta, who that we all support each other. And I said, like, white, brown, black. I'm thinking a lot about Brandy, yourself, you know, Connie, Christina Long, Britten. I mean, we are a group of like very diverse group. And now how do we bring our families together? How do we create those spaces for our children to have that experience that we're experimenting right now? Because definitely my life is richer because of all of you. Yeah. So how can we start bringing that richness to our kids? How can we start creating those spaces for our kids? Because you and I know that even there are differences between browns and blacks, right? Like when they're young, they still like, oh no, they're immigrants, they're illegals, or the other ones, oh no, they're lazy, or no, you know, there are all these stereotypes that they still carry on, and that people like us who have crossed that bridge can make it easier for them.
Yep. And I want to acknowledge what Tadana said, which is true. She said, respectfully, I think there should be some intentional work around reframing the story within the school building. As parents, we should be able to reinforce education, not be forced to re-educate. I agree with her. I agree with you 100%. But I knew that when I was younger, I wasn't going to learn anything about Black history, you know, in my school. I was going to learn about slavery, and that was it. And so anything that I had learned when it came to Black history was something that my parents taught me. And it was something that I sought out. Like, I had to actively seek out history. And Eyes on the Prize, that whole, I don't know if you guys have heard of the Eyes on the Prize. It's a bunch of old school videos, but it's Black history. And it was probably the most powerful thing that I've ever seen in my life, and just shifted. As a kid, it shifted me and how I moved in this world. And I agree that the school has some responsibility. For me as a parent, I'm not going to leave it up to them. And that's
I would
just,
say, Marquetta, one of the things about that, as a teacher,
right?
The problem becomes that they are not taught enough Black history in school.
That's right.
To even have a database in order to pull, because as a teacher, you are pulling from your well of what you have learned in order to be able to teach. And then the other part is that a lot of times teachers will only teach the pieces that they've heard, you know, that what's comfortable. Because as a teacher, sometimes the problem is I'm uncomfortable with it, so I don't know how to really share it with you. And it's nothing that I've had in my life. And so I've not had anybody, maybe I've never had a Black teacher, and that's very possible. I've never had a Black teacher. I've never had a Black professor. I've never had to take Black history in college. I've never, so there's no emphasis period in which I have to go out and seek Blackness or Hispanic or any other culture. I don't have to do that as a white person. And because of that, I don't know how to teach it. I don't know what to say. And I'm very uncomfortable. And so because I'm uncomfortable, then I just ignore it.
And we're going to introduce you guys to the very, very illustrious Michelle
so
Vann.
sorry I'm
Hitting the
late.
ground running.
I have been running since 8 o'clock this
I
morning.
know you have. I know you have. I'm passing the baton to you, Michelle, too. But
I have no idea what y'all are talking about. Well, I just think, education is such a, education comes in so many forms. And a lot of times we want to put it off. Sorry, my mic was on. They could hear me and then, they're like, what? And where is that coming from? But I think one of the things that we really have to really be conscientious of is that, as parents, we are the first teachers. And a lot of times, we have to, if we don't have the background, say I don't know anything about the Irish potato famine, then it becomes important to me to go and seek out what I need to have in order to be able to teach my children, because it is not the school's responsibility. I mean, we would love for it to be, but it's not really. They have a capability of doing all of this cross section of all of these major things. And we would love for it to be part of what they do, but at the end of the day, it is our responsibility to make sure our children know our history.
Yes, ma'am.
I think a great idea on that would be like, as Marquetta said, be a present parent. I was one of those as well. I remember there was one teacher that one day, it was my son's first high school year, and he was very curious about a fight that it was going outside, and he was running out with a friend, and then this teacher catch him and blame it on him. What are you doing? Well, and then my son was like, well, I was not doing anything. And he can be a little bit ornery when he feels attacked. So these teachers start labeling him since the first year. And then one day he told him, aren't your parents immigrants, undocumented immigrants? Well, you know what can happen to them, right? Oh my God, I was so upset that I was there the next day, really, what do you want? Well, I just asked that question because I want to help him. I'm like, no, you're not an immigration officer. You cannot help my son and you cannot give me an immigration status. So you don't ask that question. I was so mad. But after
I think that's a good thing too, Claudia, because at some point we have to empower our children to know, what questions to ask, what questions not to ask, what to do, when to not say anything, and just say, when my mom gets here, she'll be more than happy to answer your question.
So he learned that. And then the following years he was like, well, let me talk to my mom. And then the counselor went, oh, no, that's fine. We'll deal with it right now. But anyways, my point there was like, they really need to, sorry, and I went blank, sorry. But yeah, definitely, I think that's very important for them to know and to know how can they defend themselves? But okay, now I got it. Sorry, I was stumbling a little bit. So my point is like, we have to be present, and maybe if they're younger, like when they're in elementary school, like really be very purposely about coming and reading to the whole group and choose those books and talk to the teacher and say, I want to read about this. I want to read about Rosa Parks. I want to read about the Menendez family. And I don't just want my son to be exposed to that, but the rest of the class as well.
They will be, and what's really good about what you guys both are saying, it makes me think about understanding that some of these teachers are coming in with their own biases.
Absolutely.
Understanding, like Michelle said, there's a general lack of teachers of color in schools. And I mean, I remember being a mentor in school and kids coming and telling me that teachers were calling them welfare babies, that they would call them gang members, all the stuff that they would do to be derogatory towards young people of color. I remember my daughter being at school, and I'm a history buff kind of person. I love history across the board. And I used to always see kids and they're wearing those, oh God, why am I losing her name? The Bon Blanc shell. What is the old school?
Talking about wearing braids?
No.
You're talking about, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
The dress flying up in the air.
Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, you're talking about Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe, an icon. Sorry, I'm losing my head language today. But Marilyn Monroe, I would always see people wearing Marilyn Monroe shirts and celebrating Marilyn Monroe and her beauty. And I was thinking to myself, you know, there's icons of color that young people don't know about, pinup girls from back in these days, and it would be good for them to know about different women, besides just not only Marilyn Monroe. And so I sent my daughter to school in a shirt that I made, but it had an image of Donna Summer on it. And I don't know if you guys know who Donna Summer is. She's an icon from the 70s, disco kind of queen.
Disco queen.
Yeah, and it was a picture that reminded me, it was very Rihanna-ish. And I guess it would be very Donna Summer-ish, and Rihanna is just redoing it. But it was Donna Summer with glasses on. She looked real cool. And I thought it was a cool shirt. And I wanted it to be a topic of discussion. I wanted people to ask my daughter, who is this person? Or whatsoever, so my daughter can explain who she was. Well, a teacher, a history teacher no less, told my daughter, and my daughter had wore that shirt all day, don't wear that shirt anymore. And my daughter's like, why? And she said, it's too sexual. And I'm like, what? And so when my daughter told me, I called the teacher. I want you to explain to me, what is sexual about this top? What is sexual about it? She's fully clothed. The only thing that's showing is her shoulders. I said, I mentor at this school. I'm not going to out the school. I said, but I walk through these hallways and I see people wearing Marilyn Monroe with her dress flying up, Marilyn Monroe in the bikini and tattoos, Marilyn Monroe in all kinds of suggestive different poses. And they wear those shirts every day. What is the difference? And she gave me this far-fetched explanation about, well, boys always wear Marilyn Monroe shirts and they never get in trouble. But when the girls wear shirts, they get in trouble. And I just think that's wrong.
What does that have to do with anything?
Wait a minute. You just called out a girl for wearing a Donna Summer shirt. I need for you to make this make sense to me. Why she can't wear this shirt anymore. And then the next day, the teacher seen me in the hallway and she grabbed my hand and she starts bawling, starts crying. I realized that the only reason why I had an issue with that shirt is because she was Black.
At least she admitted it though.
That she was Black. And I'm a history teacher and I should know who Donna Summer is. You know, I should know this kind of stuff and the nuances. But what she should understand is how Black women throughout history are hypersexualized. And what she just did is took a Black woman on a shirt and hypersexualized it in a way, a totally innocent shirt, and made it sexual. And she invited me, and this is so funny. She was also the teacher over the feminist group there. She's the teacher over the feminist group. And so she invited me to come to that class to talk about the hypersexualization of women of color throughout the past. And it was such an important conversation to have with these young people. And it went great. But after that conversation was over, I had a Native American girl come up to me and she said, Miss Marquetta, I love the topic. I love the conversation. She said, but whenever we have conversations about race, we always talk about Black and white. We never talk about what's happening to other cultures and the xenophobia that exists in these cultures. And she said, when do I get a chance to tell my story? Yeah. When do I get to talk about what Native women are going through and all the issues that we have to address? And I looked at her and I said, I can only speak right now to what Black people are going through because that is my experience as a Black woman. That's my experience. I said, you are the catalyst to get up and talk about what Native people are going through. You would have the most authentic voice. You would know the stories the best. You are in charge of telling your story. You are right. Your story needs to be told. And she said, well, how can I do that? I said, you do just like I do. And you get up on that stage and you speak. You make sure that we recognize the story of Native women because it does deserve to be heard. And you're the catalyst for it. And that's the thing, is giving young people the power to stand up and talk about their own stories and their own cultures and their own histories and where they come from. They don't need the validation of anybody outside of them.
But I think, again, that goes back to, you have to know who you are.
You have to know who you are.
You know, I think as people that have been ripped from their roots and brought to a country that did not accept them as people. Okay, so if I am not a person, if I am considered, you know, right level with animals, then there is a piece in which I don't really know who I am. And that gets into our DNA, and that longing to want to find out who I am and want to connect. That's why, when we start to say, oh, these kids shouldn't want to be in gangs are bad, blah, 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 blah. But the problem is that when I don't know where I belong, I will go. Okay, so we go back to that whole Cheers thing, when they used to sing, everybody knows my name. Well, at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want people to know our name. We want people to come in, and we want people to say, hey, you know what? You are here, and I want you to be here. I love that you are here. I am, totally immersed in the fact that you are here, and that is why we have these gangs. That is why we have, all of these little affiliations, but it's because people want to belong, and they want to go somewhere where somebody will tell them who they are. That is why, as mothers, we have to be very cognizant that we tell our little girls who they are. Otherwise, some little boy will tell them. As mothers, we have to make sure that we tell our young men who they are. Otherwise, some other person will tell them, and they become what we tell them they are.
And then also who they could be. I think also add who they could be, like in my case, like talking about Latino community is like everybody expects to see a Latino just cleaning up, like coming to work and just cleaning. I mean, when I was working for the school district, I had people say, like, before I even could speak, they're like, oh, who are you, Maria? Oh, do you work in the kitchen? Like things like that. Nothing wrong with that, right? Nothing wrong with that, people. But I have like some ladies on leadership classes that they come to me crying and saying, Claudia, I didn't know I could continue my education. I didn't know. I thought I was just born to raise children and clean. And that's all I thought I was going to do the rest of my life.
But I'm glad you brought up the point about cleaning, because in the pandemic, it was Hispanic women, it was Black women, it was people of color that kept this United States going. Because if it wasn't for those people that were cleaning it, it wasn't for those people that had those what we don't like to look at jobs, our world would have crumbled during the pandemic. And we want to know why do brown people, why do Black and brown people have are they dying of COVID? They're dying of COVID because they're the people that are cleaning the rooms when, a COVID patient dies. They're the ones that are taking care of the people. They're the healthcare workers. Yes, they're out there making sure that there was food. At the end of the day, we were struggling, and people were like, oh my God, I don't know what we're gonna do. But there were still people, there were still immigrant workers, there were still workers that were coming in, making sure that that crop was getting out of that field. And the jobs that we don't like to look at, and the jobs that people want to look down on, those were the ones that kept us alive.
There's a question from Senator Olita for Dr. Vann.
I see it.
I
see it.
You want to read it?
Yeah, well, so Senator Faust asked if there is a place for Black history. And so in the 70s, she was, part of Black history. Now there is at East High School, I do know that they offer Black history. And so what she asked, the question that she was asked, that she was told by a state board member that there were a few educators that could teach it. Well, at the end of the day, anybody can teach anything that they want to teach. At the end of the day, education starts with me. I educate me, then I take the education that I have and I share it with my kids. So I can remember teaching for Edison, and it was a totally weird curriculum. It was just something that was just beyond like, what? And I had to go home every night and study so that I could teach second graders, which don't even make no doggone sense. But that's how it was. I had to go and figure it out every night before in order to teach them. Now, it is up to us if we want to have Black history, if we want our kids to have all of the things that they should have, then as an educator, it is my job to educate myself so that I can then educate my students. The problem is that there are people on the State Board of Education, there are educators, there are people out in the world that don't find value in Black history. And if I don't find value in it, I also won't find the time to learn about it.
That's right. And I think too, it's so important that there's ways to incorporate history into the curriculum. That I mean, you can talk about math.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying, and talk about, you know what I'm saying. You can talk about math.
So go back. So I taught elementary school for 7 years, and one of the things that I did, because here's if you understand any education system, one of the things that they will do. Reading is the most important, and math. Those are the two most important things. They're going to make sure that you're going to read and you're going to do math. Everything else becomes, it's elective. Everything is elective. History is elective. Science is elective. It's becoming more mainstream, but those are things that are elective. So one of the things that I began to do as the history person was to tell people, incorporate it. You've got to read anyway. Read a book that is historical in nature and is diverse. If you don't know, research. It's real simple. Google it and you can find books about Black people. You can find books about Hispanic people. You can find books about Asian people. If you research it, the Google is a great thing. I mean, it's a marvelous thing. You just hit Google. You go to Amazon. There are places, there are lists out there in the world if you want to find them. Again, it's about our desire. If we desire it, we can find it. So we can find books, we can incorporate Black history, we can incorporate anybody's history that we want to in anything that we teach if we want to.
And another idea is also like, call the school, call your children's school and talk to the librarian. Usually they're pretty open. A lot of the times, I don't know, when I was working at a Derby school, my office was in the library, and I used to talk a lot with the librarian. After I was there, she started ordering more books around Latinos and more books about Asian people. And I mean, I wasn't a mother, but I saw that I could influence that. And a lot of times it's not on top of their head. So just call them, bug them, call and said, hey, I noticed my son is coming up or my daughter is coming up with books from to read. Can you add more books that are, of people of color? Do you have them? Can you suggest those to my kid? And we need to start also pushing on those things.
So that's one of the things that's like the secret of libraries is that the public library is it's supposed to represent the community. So if you don't see yourself represented, you suggest that and then they buy it. So yeah, there are lists all over the place. So as I'm trying to introduce my children to other cultures and other experiences, if that book isn't there, I am requesting that because it should be there. And so, yeah, I've already said I'm like the librarian person here, but yes, you find that experience. The lists are all over. People have already done that work. It's a quick Google, and then you make sure that it's on the shelf because you're not the only one who's interested in this. So,
yeah.
And as we're starting to get closer to the wrapping up time or whatsoever, this group, we can talk about this forever. It should have been a part 2 and 3 or whatsoever, but these are the questions that I want to carry to the end. And at this time, you guys can turn on your cameras if in the audience, if it had a question you wanted to ask. But
so Dr. Gretchen, yes, absolutely. Yes, we should require all teachers to teach about Black, Brown, Asian, Indigenous. But again, that's about whether or not you want to do it.
Right. So number one, how will we move forward with generational trauma? That's one question I want you guys to think about. Number 2, how does motherhood play a role in healing? And this is, to me, the most important factor when it comes to healing, when it comes to issues of race and motherhood, because we are usually the first people that touch our kids. We are usually the ones that touch our kids the most. What role do we play in healing? So the question, I'm gonna pose it and I'm just gonna go and ask everybody, how do you move forward from generational trauma? How do we get to the healing? Britten, how do you think?
Good. I think, gosh, I go back to that quote that was in the first email when you asked us this, is we are the ones who birth this nation. We are the ones who heal it.
That's right.
Because our children look to us first. We are the example. I think you had asked me when we were prepping for this earlier, is our children are going to see a whole bunch of other adults as well, even in the online space, who are not being great examples. So it's making sure that the first example that they get in my house is me. And I think for me, it's because I'm still in my own journey of this, making sure that I'm taking them along with me and pushing up against my own discomfort in not knowing how to talk about it, but working on that with my children so that they know how to talk about it. They know how to ask the questions. They know how to support when they are out with their own friends in that. So I think it's pushing for me into that discomfort and showing my children how to do it as well, because they're going to be experiencing that out in the real world. And making sure that I'm raising children who can stand up, stand beside, stand behind in whatever way that they need. And they know how to realize that and recognize that.
Michelle, what do you think?
Tell me the question again.
So how do you think we can move past the generational trauma and start to heal? And what role does motherhood play in that healing?
So, as we think about mothers are the first healers.
That's right.
They're that's your first nurse. That's your first person that'll tell you, baby, God don't make no junk. That's the first person that, sows into your life. And so as mothers, we have to make sure that we do not vomit our trauma onto our children. So I think that, the biggest thing is, how do we go forward with healing? We go forward with healing with one family at a time. I can only truly be responsible for the kiddos that grow up in my house. Now, God has afforded me the opportunity, and others have trusted me with their children. And so I've been able to sow into the lives of lots of other little babies. But at the end of the day, the children that I birthed forth are the ones that I am responsible for making sure that I help them heal, that I help them grow, that I help them matriculate, and that if I don't have the answer, that I go find it. That might mean that I need to get a therapist involved. That might mean that I got to get a pastor involved. That might mean that I need to get the village involved. There was a thing, growing up for me, it was a village. We all lived within about 3 or 4 blocks of each other, and anybody's mama could whoop your behind. Straight up. And then take you home and say, look, this is what happened and this is what I did. And we were much stronger when that was the case. Now don't get me wrong. I don't necessarily advocate corporal punishment, but I can promise you that it made me think a couple of times before I did anything. And I will tell you that when that village was strong, there was a whole lot of foolishness that didn't happen, because you knew everybody was watching and you knew everybody would tell. And now we've gone to this place where we don't believe that anybody should tell our kids anything. And so I think that, as we get through trauma, part of that getting through that trauma is really being honest with who we are and what we're called to do, where we are and where we're going, and that we may not have all the answers. And so we need to seek our friends, we need to seek our family members, and we need to seek the village to help us to be able to get those answers.
That's right. Claudia?
I think I want to go back to how this conversation started, to identity, help them be comfortable with who they are. And I know this is going to sound painful, but in my case, I feel like I had some responsibility in exposing my son at a very young age. the true pain of being an immigrant. Again, he saw his mother being arrested by immigration, just like so many kids are right now in the border who were taken apart from their parents, you know. And for some time I felt guilty about it, but at the same time, I know that had made my son stronger. So I'm not saying that we have to expose them to that necessarily, but I think our children need to know our own stories. We have to tell them our stories, even if they're painful. They need to know about their family, our stories. And then the other thing is, I was yesterday in another panel with middle schoolers on social and cultural cohesion. And another panelist was sharing how, he's very young, and he was sharing how he was being criticized by his own family for being Latino, but growing up among a lot of Black people and acting like Black people or a Black person. So I want to say that we have so much to learn from each other. I even want to bring up the LGBT movement, you know, where we have to create those spaces where they can feel themselves, not who I expect, not who everybody else expect, but they have to be themselves, and we as mothers not make them feel ridiculous for liking African American music in my case, or Asian music, or watching Asian movies, or you know. So just accept them for who they are, and talk to them, have those conversations.
I think, and for me, I think I could just go by how I mothered, period. In my house, my kids were exposed to all different kind of music. We would choose a culture for the week, and we would learn the dances. We would dance, we would celebrate, we would do those things so that my kids understood. I wanted them to understand on a worldly level, not just the being from Wichita, Kansas level. We read a bunch of books about all different kinds of culture. My kids, with their palate, they were challenged to eat foods that weren't necessarily from their culture. We would call it, we would just go out there and do fear factor challenges. We would challenge ourselves to eat things that weren't necessarily things we would normally eat. But what it did, it made them be open to all kind of different foods from all different kinds of places. I exposed my kids on a regular to different cultures, different lifestyles, different religions. I'm not a religious person. I wasn't even going to impose religion on my kids. I exposed them to it. And it was their choice where they wanted to go. I just think it's healthier for us to recognize that our kids are their own human beings. They're going to be living their own existence. And what I tried not to do, I wanted to give them, healthy values, but I didn't want to impose my values on them because that might not be their values. I wanted to expose them to race, but I wasn't going to impose all my feelings about race on them. I just wanted to give them the education behind it. And they got to figure out who they were going to be and what kind of human they were going to be in this world. They were exposed to all different kinds of people. And my thing is just, how do we heal as mothers? As a mother of color, a Black mother, I had to teach my children about race from the very beginning. I can't speak as a white mother because that's something that white parents haven't had to do, is actually talk about race. And so that journey, how you guys define that journey, how important that journey and that conversation will be for you is something that you guys have to define, but it's so important because the world is shifting no matter what. The world is shifting, and right now, minorities are not exactly the minorities.
No, we're the global majority.
We're the global majority. And so it's going to get past being a world that people of color have to, fit into. And it's going to shift to being the opposite. And what side of the scale do you want your child on? What side of the scale do you want your child on? And feeding fear into your children, feeding power and privilege into your children is not going to fare well in this world that's coming 20 years from now. It's not. And it shouldn't be a scary thing, because in order for us to be a successful society, diversity has to exist. Culture It's what
Well,
shifts this
and the
world.
more you make it taboo, the more they become intrigued.
I mean, seriously.
I mean, we always want the thing we're not supposed to have.
Right. It's true. So I feel like the healing comes as mothers. Like you said, Britten, we brought you into this world. We can take you out. We can take you out. And we have to get to a point as mothers where we're given that power structure of white men, all that power. We are raising these kids. We are raising these people, and it's hard to find fault in your child. And you wonder why privilege exists for so long. If you're the one that's birthing these kids, if this is your father, your uncle, your brother, your child, it's hard to find fault in it. And once we take those rose-colored glasses and start to look at it for what it really is, we start to realize that the way that we were raising our kids is not that cute. It's not healthy.
Well, I mean, I'm back and forth between presently in a funeral with a young girl who,
Right.
Because in my other life we do ministry, but with a girl that grew up with us, and we buried her first child and raised her other kids. And the thing about it is, at the end of the day, we all go the same way. We all come in the same way. We all go out the same way. There's no, when you go to those graves, now don't get me wrong, there are people who choose to segregate cemeteries, but when you go out there, you don't know who's white and who's black and who's Hispanic. I mean, you can look at a name and maybe make some assumptions, but you don't really know. When that kid is born, you don't really know. My grandmother is the same complexion I am, but on her birth certificate, she was marked white. She wasn't. And if you look at my grandparents, you know that. But it's someone's judgment. And when we look at race, when we look at those constructs, at the end of the day, race was determined, whether we're black or white or whatever we call people. That is it is a made up construct, so that we have division, so that someone can remain and can get superiority. And so at the end of the day, if we, we're not stupid. I mean, we can see the difference between complexions. Some of us are more melanated than others. But by that same thing, if we look at people like people, I'm not worried about what your complexion is. I'm worried about what your heart looks like.
And I have to share this here with you guys. I feel always very uncomfortable when I have to fill out that part of because in Mexico, they never ask you for a race or anything like that. So here, every time I have to check the box white, I get so uncomfortable because they ask us for, so we're supposed to be checking white and then Hispanic. And I hate it. I want to check Native American. I feel like we're from America, and
so I always challenge, and I'll be honest, Claudia, I always challenge every Hispanic kid that marks white. I always challenge, no, find a brown culture. Don't mark white, because what happens is there is a piece in which, when we start to look at funding, when we start to look at the ways things are constructed, by the fact that you mark white, they can clump you together and they can say, oh, well, we don't need to fund the brown people because they don't need it.
80% of the community is white. You're right. I'm going to do that. I was just so afraid that they will come back to me.
Nope.
You're not Native American.
I tell kids, especially like when they're filling out their FAFSAs and they're trying to do that, and they'll be like, oh, but we're supposed to mark white. I said, fine. I don't care which brown race you mark, but you better mark a brown one. It don't matter which one, but choose a brown one, because at the end of the day, we're losing funding. We're losing our voice because there is a big block of people that are marking white.
Because there's not a good option on there for them.
Absolutely, but again, that goes back to constructs. We have there is a people that have constructed those applications, that have created this system, and this system says, we don't want you to mark Hispanic. We don't want you to mark Native American. We don't want you. So we're going to clump you in this group and we're going to say you're white. And then you can choose another subcategory, but we don't count those subcategories. We only count the fact that you're marking yourself as white. And so when we really start to if all those people began to say, you know what, screw this. We're not marking white anymore. We're just going to mark brown. We're going to choose a brown. I promise you white people would not be the majority anymore.
I don't even feel comfortable doing it. I hate it.
And it's funny that when it comes to just the census, that you lose your identity in a box, like by checking a box can.
But so if I'm half black and I'm half white, which box do I mark?
Right.
I mean, I have kids ask me that all the time. Well, Miss, I'm not just white, or I'm not just black. My mom is white, my dad is black. I'm all of both. What box am I supposed to mark? Other isn't a race. I mean, so we're doing this thing. We're creating this thing because there is someone, and I don't know who that someone is. Senator might be able to tell us, but there is someone in the federal government, in the state government, in the whatever it is, that is saying that we need to have this classification. Again, racism is a made-up construct. So there is a piece in which we've got to have this classification in order to be able to give you funds or whatever. And we choose to mark it in this way.
And then we have this senator who is trying to implement, now that we have Senator Olita here, we have this senator in Topeka who's trying to get the civic test, like the US citizenship test for high schoolers. What about, instead of that, just bring in like more African Americans and Mexican American studies and other cultures, like Dr. Gretchen is suggesting? I think that will be better suited than the US citizenship class.
Well, but I think here's the question. So the question becomes, we're asking people that American culture is not their native. And we're asking them to come in and take a test that most Americans can't even answer
at all.
They're asking them questions, and they know more about history and what is or isn't than the people who were born here, because most people here cannot answer those questions. I would venture to say that if you passed it out in the Senate and you passed it out in the House of Representatives, they cannot answer those questions.
That's right. That's right. Oh, this is
so the people that are, the people that are passing the citizenship probably are more citizens than not.
They are. It's true. I mean, it's true. It's so true. We expect more of people that are coming in this country than we expect of ourselves, and that goes into that the invitation to the table kind of theory is, and what I do to disrupt it, and everything that I do with young people. Even having an invitation to the table is still, it's necessary, but it's still giving people the space and the power to tell you no. And
well,
so
if I'm invited to the table, why am I here?
But the deal is you shouldn't need an invitation. You should already be raised to know that you belong there, period. It shouldn't require somebody going, we're inviting you into and I know systemically and in the past, it was created that we were not invited into these spaces. But my thing is, do like the first people that broke into those spaces did, show up. Because if a lot of us start showing up and coming into these spaces, no matter what, then the culture of that environment is going to shift no matter what. And so we have to stop giving people in powerful positions the space to give us permission to be in spaces. You belong there. Just go. Just go. And that's the work that I do with young people. We're showing up. We're going to be there. You're going to engage us. We're going to talk. We're going to discuss. But we don't need your invitation. We're just going to show up. And
Marquetta,
I think it's so important. Yes, ma'am.
So just remember what Shirley Chisholm said. If they don't have a chair for you, bring a folding chair. Bring your own chair.
Your own. Yes, ma'am. So I know we're going a little bit of overtime. I appreciate that, Senator Faust. That's so real.
That's a good way to end, though. Bring
That
your
is
own chair.
Bring your own chair. And if you need
That'll
to,
preach
bring
right
your
there. Bring
own
your
table.
own chair.
And bring your own table. Because
Right.
sometimes those tables that you bring are cooler than the tables that's been established. So bring your own table and your own chairs. Make them
Yes.
want to sit at your table.
Yes.
It's true.
Yeah,
So much
That's like
fun.
being the
Yeah.
little kid that brought I was the little kid that always had the bag that always had the fried chicken on the bus.
That's
Everybody wanted to sit by me. Because my mama fried chicken and we had, like when you had to take your own lunch on the bus,
Mhm.
I always had the fried chicken. Yeah,
You had a good
be the one,
meal.
bring your own lunch so that somebody want to sit by you.
Right. That's right.
well, I think that's a great note to end on today, but this is just the beginning of the conversation. And I mean, I would love to talk about, conversation number 2, number 3.
I'll be on time next
4.
time. Sorry.
What, Michelle?
I won't be late next time.
Oh, you more than made up for it. Believe
You
me,
did.
you came in ready to roll. I can't thank all of you enough. Britten, Claudia, Michelle, Marquette, Senator, thank you for being here. Such a pleasure to see you. Leslie, thanks for joining us, and everyone else who has their cameras turned off today. I hope we can build on this. I hope we can broaden this conversation in this community and keep moving forward.
We
Absolutely.
definitely have some voices that aren't at this table that we can bring on for
That we
round
can-
2 and around 3 and around 4. So
Yes.
Definitely. And I would love. I want to kind of just poke in there real quick that the xenophobia that is plaguing Asian Americans today, it's bad. It's out there right now. We need to acknowledge their stories and start to listen to what they're going through, because there's too many stories that are getting pushed underneath the rug because there's so many stories that are taking presence. And so just making sure that we realize that there are different levels of suffering that's happening in our community that need to be acknowledged, and that we need to get those voices to the table too.
Absolutely.
Thank you all.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Everyone, thank you so much, and have a lovely weekend, and we will talk some more.
Thanks. I appreciate you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank-